Smith, and I am CEO of Equality Institute. And welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I am joined today by Darnell. Darnell, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Darnell Adams. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, and I am a facilitator and trainer for Equality Institute. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being with me, Darnell. So for those of you just joining us for the first time, this is 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly LinkedIn live show in which I talk about good vibes in DEI. There are a lot of stories out there about what's going wrong, like negative data, negative news about what's not working and what corporations can be doing better. But what I like to find are the positive stories, the good news, the good vibes, because I believe that there are lessons there that we can all take and bring back to our own organization. So I write a weekly newsletter called 5 Things, which you can subscribe to at 5thingsdei.com. And then on Monday, I am joined on LinkedIn by a guest, and we talk about these good vibes in DEI. We want to start your work week out right. All right, so Darnell, today we're going to talk about Transgender Day of Visibility, which was just this past Thursday. Now, I am cisgender, which means I'm not transgender, but I have a lot of transgender friends and colleagues now, and that it wasn't always the case with me. In fact, as of about 6 years ago, I didn't know anyone transgender really, or I knew one person who was a former client. What's your journey been like?
Yeah, I mean, my journey has mostly been through athletics, which is really kind of an interesting thing because, particularly now, in some of the headlines and flashpoints that are happening around athletics and participation of trans women in sports. For me, at least in the league that I'm in, that I still play in Boston, which is a flag football league, this question kind of came up quite a bit of time ago, but also a question I kind of like debate, which in some ways is kind of unfortunate, right? But in terms of being on the football field, was a kind of an entryway to get to know so many really fantastic trans folks and have relationship not on the field but also off.
Fantastic. So, one of the things that we talk about here are best practices and what organizations are doing right. And I'm going to shout out the federal government, the Biden administration, big time in today's session because they've really modeled excellent policies. So we'll talk about some of those in a few minutes. But I just really want to come back to Transgender Day of Visibility because honestly, without the brave trans folks like you and I, like we've both met, who have that courage to be visible despite the policies that are being put forth in athletics and in different states, it requires an awful lot of courage for them to come out and be visible. And I really, I want to honor that. I want to honor that as an ally and know that I don't always get it right, but I try my best. Do you have any ally tips before we get into the Biden administration's new policies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it really struck me in some ways, like the language around kind of the day of visibility.
Mm-hmm.
And the ways in which certain communities and trans community has been made invisible. So I think certainly as folks, as an ally, someone who aspires to be an ally, in the ways in which we think first about ourselves, the way we kind of move around the world, are the news that we're picking up, the sense makers out there, like who we're listening to, and broaden that as much as possible to include trans folks, right? So there's not invisibility in your own personal life that's happening, right? For me, that's been very important, so that my viewpoint is not just coming from a cisgender kind of point of view, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one first step, little step, is make sure that there's not invisibility that's happening for trans folks in your own life.
I think that's great advice. I mean, honestly, just diversifying the content you consume. Exactly. Following different people, listening to different podcasts, all of that. You're right. That can just change our perspectives because we learn by empathy. I mean, that's a key way we learn, and by storytelling. So it starts with you and how you and the content we all can consume. All right, cool, great advice, Darnell. All right, so let's move on to some of these new policies from the Biden administration. So now, anyone who files a discrimination claim with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, they will now have a third gender option on that complaint form. So prior to last week, there were just male and female options. Now there's a third gender option. Similarly, we're seeing gender X on passports now. So that is official as of April 11th. So 1 week from today, people can get gender X, a third gender, on passports. So these are really significant policy changes we're seeing from the Biden administration that are inclusive.
Yeah, I really was thinking a lot about the EEOC move and the experience that one might have when in the very beginning of a process in which you might be claiming or reporting a discriminatory situation, that you're not even reflected in the intake form, right?
Right.
Like, what a feeling that must have been. And so, these moves that in some ways for some people will be like, oh yeah, it's another checkbox. And I think just in terms of this thing about visibility, the quality of being seen, particularly if you're in a situation in which you're being discriminated against, and then the way in which you report that discrimination doesn't see you, and how damaging that could be. So that was a great move to see, for sure.
Absolutely. And, I write this newsletter every week. Sometimes I don't get responses. That's all cool. My goal with this newsletter is to help one person see a story and be like, oh, that's really cool. How can I adapt that for my own organization? Right? That's my goal. Well, Darnell, I received an email this morning that said,
Ooh.
just wanted to say this is from Julie. Just wanted to say thank you for these emails. This one prompted me to look at our payroll system and activate the non-binary gender option for self-identification. So guess what? These ideas work. That is why I keep writing these newsletters. That is why I keep sharing these good vibes, because people actually make the changes and we can be inspired by the good news. We really can. So thank you, Julie, for sending me that message and for creating a more inclusive environment for your employees at your own organization. All right, it's very cool. Okay, so next update also comes from the federal government. This comes from the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. They are now updating their body scanners at airport screenings to update the technology that does not base the activity of the screeners on gender. So right now, someone who does not have pre-check has to go through the scanner where they put their hands over their head. And that scanner has a button on the other side. And the TSA person has to choose male or female based on how that passenger looks. And then sometimes the scanner detects an abnormality based on traditional anatomy. And so it causes all sorts of problems for transgender travelers. That system is being revamped. It's no longer gender-based. And that is amazing news for trans travelers. Did I get that out right?
You absolutely did. And I don't, did you know how the technology worked prior to?
Yes.
This is something that I didn't quite know how it worked, and how truly disturbing
Right?
it was. Boy,
Because people then, sorry, go ahead.
imagine, like, you're male, female, male, this dichotomy, right? And like all the ways people present, and it was that, so that person and their experiences and their openness or not, their biases or not, that are just,
Yep.
and what would be part of what your experience might be.
That's
So
exactly right.
I cannot imagine what was happening in all sorts of ways, but certainly to trans community in travel. And it's good riddance.
They have to, a lot of times they'll have to come out, so they'll have to out themselves as they're going through TSA, or and then they're subject to like really invasive pat downs and not unnecessary pat downs. Like Google transgender in TSA, and you'll like read horror stories online. So this is a absolutely much needed update to the
I
policy.
I knew about the pat downs.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand the technology that actually in many ways reinforced the behavior and the things that were happening.
Yep.
Right. Oh, yeah, good riddance.
Yeah.
Did I say that before? I'll say it again.
Yeah, and honestly, those were just 3 different policy changes that came out last week. There were a whole bunch more. It's all really exciting stuff for trans folks, especially because at the state level, there are a lot of states who are making it very difficult to be openly LGBTQ and especially openly trans. So I'm glad to see the federal government doing some really great stuff. It really does make a difference. Okay, so let's talk about a few other things. Oscars. We're not going to talk about the slap, but I do want to celebrate the movie Coda, the film Coda, which starred an all deaf or mostly deaf cast and won Best Picture, won Best Actor, or maybe Best Picture, and a few others. Like a really significant move for disability representation at that level.
Tell you, I've heard about Coda, haven't seen it. I finally broke down and got that app. Spend the money so I can watch it. That and Ted Lasso. So excited about watching it, but also the ways in which stories are being told, and that are kind of, now that we're not just, Hollywood is just one way to go about telling different stories.
Yeah.
But there's all these other different ways that something as important as a story like Coda is coming out for the masses to see, right? To be able to hear some voices that we may not necessarily hear all the time. So I'm excited to hear about.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I'll definitely be watching it this week. CODA stands for Children of Deaf Adults, so that's the perspective of the story. So I'll definitely watch it this week. I'm excited for them. I'm excited for what this means and the precedent that it could potentially set, that these types of films, which star, in this case, a largely deaf cast, can be mainstream. Right. It's like validation, right? This representation does matter. Okay, last story of the week, which I'm very curious about your perspective of as a Black flag football player, is that the Rooney Rule has now been expanded in the NFL to require women, or have women be part of the mandatory slate of diverse candidates for coaching positions. So you're an athlete. I'm not. Tell me what you think about this.
Ambivalent, deeply ambivalent. And it's not just for women coaches. It's the original kind of inception of the Rooney Rule and what's happened since that time. So a little bit, if you had to have a chance to read the article yet, and are maybe don't follow football, the Rooney Rule was instituted in 2002, kind of pushed by the Rooney family for Pittsburgh Steelers, in order to see more BIPOC coaches in the field. Ultimately, the league is by far majority Black and brown. Coaches are not, right? So it's not representative in terms of the people who are actually involved in football. those opportunities have not been necessarily afforded. So the Rooney rules say, hey, if you have an opening, that you must bring in a certain amount of candidates, BIPOC candidates, but specifically Black candidates. And in 2000, from 2002 until now, it's hardly moved the needle. And there have been some female coaches as well, but not that many. So kind of the extension of this is great in some ways, like kind of conceivably that, all right, they're saying you must now hire a certain amount of women and Black coaches. But I still think that there's something deeply institutionally wrong, that it would take something to say you must do it this way in order for people to actually give opportunity for Black coaches and for women coaches. It's disturbing, and I don't know if this is going to fix it, if there's something kind of institutionally happening across the board.
Well, we will keep an eye on it. I appreciate that perspective. You know, I'm an optimist, right? So I'm always like, okay, gotta find the good vibes. I'm a silver lining seeker. But I know that there's toxic positivity, and I try not to be that person.
No, I don't see this talking about positivity. I certainly don't want to say that there's not an opportunity here yet again, NFL, not another opportunity to move in the direction for more inclusivity. This is definitely yet another opportunity. And I'm going to stay with that this time it will work, and we will see more people, more women, more Black coaches being able to participate in a sport that I actually do love, but it does come with some of its challenges, sometimes including this. So NFL, you can do it. Do it.
Well, I bet one thing that we'll see now that we haven't seen before is a lot more accountability. So there's going to be a lot more pressure. And if nothing else, that will help. I know it will.
I believe it will too.
And we can hold them accountable right here on 5 Things in 15 Minutes. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Darnell. Thank you all for joining us this session. And we will see you next week on 5 Things in 15 Minutes. If you don't already get the newsletter for Good Vibes in DEI, go to 5thingsdei.com. Bye, everyone. Thanks. Have a great week.